As a math teacher, I think I understand the concept of infinity fairly well. And probably many of you do too. We all have a soul that's going to exist forever, whether it be with God or in hell. But I want you to imagine a different aspect of infinity. Instead of projecting it forward in time, try to think of something that has no beginning. If you're like me, you can't do it. I can't do it. I can't imagine anything that has existed that didn't have a beginning. Such is the nature of God. He transcends even time itself. He is unfathomable to us. We cannot fully comprehend him. As finite beings, we perceive wisdom as something that's acquired over time. We get more of it as we grow. The dictionary defines wisdom as understanding what is true, right, or lasting. It also adds good judgment. We can all remember a time when we did not possess wisdom. Unless you're a teenager, then you already have had it. But interestingly, several of the qualifications of elders, they're related to wisdom and experience. You don't have to go there, but in 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1, there are at least 4, and there are probably more, that relate to elders having wisdom and experience. Not being a novice, being able to teach, ruling his own house well, and not being self-willed or arrogant, which is the opposite of humility. Arrogance is being overly convinced of one's own importance. It's immature, it's childish, it's not something that an elder should have. In 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 25, Paul says, "The foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men." I think that's probably one of the biggest understatements in the Bible. He was trying to put it into words, it's inspired words, and yet God's trying to get across an idea to us that we can't fully grasp. He's comparing two things that are so far apart, there's no comparison. Isaiah tried it back in Isaiah chapter 55 and verse 9. He said, "For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." Even that doesn't do God's wisdom justice. Words fail to describe how much higher he is than us. Which finally brings me to my topic for this evening, God's omniscience. The word literally means all knowledge. That is, he knows everything there is to be known. And he always has. There was never a time he did not possess this infinite knowledge. He didn't learn it. It's just an inherent part of his nature. His knowledge is unlimited in all areas. He's not an expert. He is the expert in everything. Which means it's impossible for God to be surprised by anything. Let that sink in for a minute. If you're like me, it kind of makes your mind spin with all that means. I don't think we can fully comprehend that. But let's just think about a few of the necessary implications of God being omniscient and what that means for us. First of all, it means if I don't agree with something, if I don't agree with God about something, I'm wrong. Because he isn't. So there's no discussion, there's no argument. I'm wrong. If I disagree with God about something, I'm wrong. Job had to learn it. Job was probably a pretty smart guy, but he had to learn that. He didn't understand why he was going through all the suffering that he had, and God needed to remind Job who he was. And so in Job chapter 38, God tells Job, who is this who darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Now prepare yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding. And he goes on for 4 chapters, Job 38 through 41, to tell Job all the things that he didn't know. Well, when he's done, Job at the beginning of chapter 42 says, "You asked, who is this who hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me which I did not know. So Job humbles himself. He accepts God's will. That's what we need to do. If there's something that we don't understand or we don't agree with God about, we need to be humble, because we're the ones who need to change. We're the ones who are wrong. Remember, God's omniscient. He knows everything. A second implication of God's omniscience, if I ever for a second think that times have changed since the Bible was written, God didn't anticipate the way things would be in the future, so no. If we even start thinking that, we're mistaken. There's nothing God didn't think of. Like, wow, I didn't think of that. God thought of everything. He's omniscient. But we do that sometimes. Because we're human, we do that sometimes. We don't realize we're doing it till later. It's foolish. Let me just give you one example. And Christians are not immune to this, unfortunately, but this is happening a lot in the world right now. God created us male and female. God created marriage. He knows how we're designed because He designed it. He did it. And so I know this can be hard to accept if you feel like you've always been attracted to someone of the same sex, but are you going to trust your feelings or are you going to trust God? Because God knows what He's doing all the time. He's omniscient, remember? So if our feelings don't agree with what God says, we're the ones who are wrong. We've got to accept that. And finally, the third thing that God's omniscience implies is we can put our complete trust and obedience in Him. He doesn't make mistakes, and He's never going to disappoint us. Think back to the story of Abraham. Genesis 15, God tells Abraham about His plan. He's going to make his descendants numbered as the stars of heaven. Abraham's old. He doesn't have a son. I'm sure he didn't understand how God was going to do that. But he believed Him. And we're told that it was counted to him for righteousness. About 30 years later, in Genesis 22, God commanded Abraham to sacrifice his only son, Isaac, the son of promise. He told him, this is the son of promise. You're going to get all your descendants. He said, I need you to sacrifice him to me. You think Abraham understood that? No way. But what did he do? He knew God was right. And so he trusted God and obeyed Him. And when Isaac asked, where's the lamb for the offering? What did he say? God will provide. How? He had no idea how God, he knew He sort of had provided. He didn't know how it was going to work out, but He was going to do it anyway. And He would have done it if God hadn't sent an angel to stop Him. And the Hebrew writer in Hebrews 11, verse 19, reveals kind of what Abraham was thinking at that time. Abraham didn't understand. He was trying to figure it out. Concluding that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from which He also received him in a figurative sense. That's faith. And that's why Abraham is in Hebrews 11. That's faith. And that's the kind of faith we need to have. I want to conclude by reading a couple verses in Hebrews chapter 4. We've been talking about God's omniscience. He knows everything. We'll begin reading in verse 12. For the word of God is living and powerful and sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing even to the division of soul and spirit and of joints and marrow, and is a discerner of the thoughts and intents of the heart. There is no creature hidden from His sight, but all things are naked and open to the eyes of Him to whom we must give account. I don't know about you, that's a little bit scary to me. He's a discerner of the thoughts and intents of the heart. I'd really rather He didn't know some of the things I've thought. But God knows about all our skeletons. All of them. All of them. And we must give account to Him. Everything's open to Him. That's kind of scary. Luckily, if you read the next few verses, let's pick up in verse 14. Seeing then that we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but was in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us therefore come boldly to the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need. I'm glad he continued there with that thought. Amazingly, even though God knows everything that we've done or said or thought, He still loves us and wants to save us. Why? I don't know, but I'm so glad that he does. And all he asks us to do is what Abraham demonstrated for us so well: trust and obey. So if you would like to do that tonight, we extend to you the Lord's invitation to come now as we stand and as we sing. Jesus.